Today I'm going to be talking to Houria Bouteldja, a French activist and one of the main spokespeople of the French Party of the Natives of the Republic, or the indigenous people of the Republic, when translated into English. She's been involved actively since the riots in the French suburbs or the banlieues in 2005, trying to create and build a movement in France which speaks up for the voiceless, whose voices are rarely, if ever, heard on the French media. Since that time, in fact, over the last decade, France and French politics have continued to take a further turn to the right. So we're going to be discussing all this and, of course, the responses to the appalling terrorist attack in Paris of a few months ago, and a year ago, the events of Charlie Hebdo and the responses to them. So France, in many ways today, is a very polarized society, even though it gives the impression of being something different. Houria, welcome. Could you explain what is your organization, how it functions, why it was created?
The name of the organization is Le Parti des Indigènes de la République. In English, the Party of the Indigenous of the Republic, which means, indigenous for us, means post-colonial subjects. That is to say, people living in France who are French, but who come from the former colonies, from Africa, from North Africa, and from the West Indies. The particularity of this specific population is to suffer from systematic racism, that is to say, state racism. And we decided, as people of color, to organize ourselves in one organization that defends our interests, because we think we are not protected by the left parties in France, because they are not aware of what racism is.
So it's not a party in the sense of a normal party. It's more like a movement which effectively concentrates on fighting racism and Islamophobia, etc.
More than that.
More than that. Explain.
Because we are fighting imperialism. We are coming from the former colonies, and we think that the French state is a colonial state. It is an imperialist state, and we live inside this state. And we feel responsible, because in a way we get benefit from this situation. We are lower class people from the worker class, etc. But we are just like, in relationship to Africa, for example, we are in a situation of relative advantage.
You have certain privileges.
We have privileges. So we are fighting imperialism, so we can say our own privilege, but we are fighting racism, because in France we are not the equal of the other French people.
And yet the proud claim of French parties of the left and the conservative right, not the extreme right, for many decades has been that France is a republic, that all its citizens under this republic are equal, and they have explained this fact to argue in favor of discrimination, particularly against Muslims, but against Arabs in general. And this much vaunted republicanism, your organization argues, is in fact a total charade.
It's a myth. It's a myth.
It's a complete myth.
It's a myth, and we know it's a myth. But people of color know it's a myth because they are the victims of police violence, of police crimes for 3 decades in France. 90% of the people dying from police violence are Arabs or black. This is the first thing. But there is another problem. The big discrimination at a national scale. People from the suburbs, who are mostly black and Arabs and Muslims, are suffering 3 or more times from unemployment. They are discriminated from the job, from employment, from school, etc., etc. So there is a systematic discrimination against non-white people.
Which is institutionalized.
Yes, but when we talk about this population, we can see it is discriminated. But in the French Republic, women are also discriminated. So it is a total myth that there is equality in this republic. It's a total myth.
That women in general are discriminated against.
Yes, including white women, of course.
In the sense of employment, rising to high positions.
Exactly. Exactly.
Now, why is it that France in particular has developed in this fashion, Houria? I mean, I was amazed in 2005 when there were riots in the banlieues, when the French police went and, after the French police went and killed people, that in these riots there was very little solidarity from the left or the far left organizations.
That's true.
Now that couldn't happen in this country.
That's true.
So how do you explain the sort of depth of this, that it's not just the rest of France, it's even left-wing France or far left France, which is cut off from any work of solidarity?
I think that first of all we have to consider geopolitical issues. I think that the French state is declining, first of all. And the French people usually feel themselves as central, but now their power is declining. First of all, in the field of international relationship, so the power of French is declining too. This is the first thing. The second thing is that as racism is increasing, as the governments do not have any solutions for the poor people in France, racism is rising. But in the same time, the radical left, was not able during 30 years to understand the problems of the suburbs. For 30 years, people from the immigration, people of color, said, we have problems. Our problems are racism, discrimination, and violence, police violence. These are our main problems, and we are pro-Palestinian. Okay, these are our issues. The left was never able to understand this and to make it in their program, to make these issues in their programs. But they did worse than that. They supported the law against the veil that was promoted by the socialist and the right parties. Okay? So this complicity of the big parts of the radical left with the institutional, with the government, was just like a trahison, une trahison, okay? And there was, and after that, it is for us very difficult to make people understand that we have to work with the left. It's very, for example, now the regression is so big that people do not make the difference between the far right and the far left.
You mean people in the suburbs?
Yes, Yes, and
it's as serious as that.
It's very, very, very serious. And we noticed that a lot of people from the suburbs say we want to vote for the extreme right. Yes. They do not really think that the extreme right is a solution, but they want to show that they are not now in solidarity with the radical left.
They feel completely betrayed by it?
Yes. And it's very difficult for us as a party, as a movement, as a political movement, to make understand that we have partners and it must be the left. So what we say to the left is that now it has to make big decisions. It has to understand what is Islamophobia. It has to understand that Islamophobia is a state racism. We are not talking about religion. We are talking about rights. They have to understand the importance of anti-Zionism. They have to understand that they have to defend us when we say we are anti-Zionist, we are not anti-Semitic.
But here you see there has been a big shift, of course, in French political life, in French intellectual life, because in the last century, certainly in the 60s and the 70s, and even to a certain extent in the first half of the 80s, there were strong sections within the French left, who, for instance, spoke up on Palestine, who were very critical of Israel. I mean, some of the most powerful critiques of Israel and Zionism came from intellectuals of Jewish origin, Maxime Rodinson, but one. There were many, many others. Yes. This now seems to be completely on the decline. That also explains why those segments of the French Jewish population are silenced. They're scared, they stay at home. It's not that they like what Israel is doing, but they won't come out because they have been, there's a sort of atmosphere which says that anti-Semitism is on the increase, etc., etc. How do you see that?
The Jews are not so silent. Actually, we have partners, anti-Zionist partners who are Jew and who...
I was talking about CRIF, the mainstream.
Yes, but our partners are not silent. They are activists and they understand what is at stake. But, as you know, the media will never give them
any publicity.
But in the contrary, the CRIF, the Zionist lobby, is always on TV. And it is very influenced, which is a very dangerous thing, because as people, normal people, regarding watching TV, they always see Zionist Jews on TV. They say all the Jews are Zionists. So it creates anti-Semitism.
Of course.
It creates anti-Semitism. So what we try to do is to fight this idea, making the difference between, of course, Zionism and anti-Semitism. It's hard. It's very hard. But the problem, the main problem, is not the fact that the establishment is Zionist. We know this. The main problem is the behavior of the radical left. They can be anti-Zionist. They can be very clear on what is the role of Israel. They know what is Israel. They know that it is a colonial state. But the problem is that they don't want to make alliances with people of the suburbs because they are afraid of being accused of being anti-Semitism, because they think people of the suburbs are anti-Semitic, generally speaking. So as they don't want to make alliances with us, there are no possibility of big collective.
Houria, following the attack on Charlie Hebdo over a year ago now, there was the beginnings of some debate in order to try and understand this. And Emmanuel Todd has written a book on this whole business, which was a surprise.
Yes.
Because it's a book which, you know, even if you don't agree with everything in it, is effectively quite a strong critique of the dominant ideological culture of France in which he lives. And you can see that he's very angry about that.
Yes.
And he describes the people who demonstrated, you know, that official march that was organized by the French state after Charlie Hebdo. He calls them zombie Catholics, upper middle class people, many of whom would have been on the anti-gay and anti-abortion demonstrations organized by the Catholic Church months ago. And it makes him angry that this is what France has come down to. The solutions he comes up with, I mean, of course, one can agree and agree strongly that the inequality in France is disgusting and all that. But I think it is wrong to simply ascribe to what's going on in France as something related exclusively to France. It's the world, it's geopolitics, it's the wars in the Middle East, it's the continuous Israeli destruction of the Palestinians as a historical nation, etc., etc. That he's weak on. But he has, in fact, spoken at meetings organized by yourself, so it does represent a break.
It is a break, and it was the debate after the publishing of his book was very violent, and all the establishment was against him, which is, of course, interesting. Which is interesting, and what is interesting is that he is himself, he belongs to the establishment.
And the other book, of course, is Edwy Plenel's little pamphlet for the Muslims, which he is now enlarging for publication in English after Charlie Hebdo and after Bataclan. So you have at least two fairly well-known people in the country, which is a step forward in these bad times.
Yes, because we are in a period of crisis, and in this kind of period, we have always people who create the events, who are surprising.
Houria, you have often discussed in the past some of the laws that exist. For instance, I remember the last time we met, you were telling me that there actually is a law in France that the French colonial experience has to be portrayed in a positive way in school textbooks. Could you explain this?
Yes, it is a law that says, an official law that says that the French colonialism was good. Was positive. And
has to be portrayed as such in school and textbooks?
Yes.
This is a law?
This is a law. This is a law.
And there are no...
L'œuvre positive française dans ces colonies. Yes.
It's unbelievable, actually, given what the French record actually is. You know, in just...
This is a sign of decline, really. They need to say that colonialism was good, because they regret this period. Because now France is a small country.
It's a small country, and all its dreams of grandeur have finished. They've become nightmares. And it's now an Atlanticist country, totally loyal to the needs of the Pentagon and Washington. It has no independence at all, which has reduced its position even inside the European Union. Because the Germans can't take them too seriously now. They're like Britain has been for a long, long time. But coming back to France today, Houria, we have a state of emergency.
Yes.
Demonstrations are banned, including green demonstrations. And we have a political elite whose center of gravity has been moving to the right for the last 30 years. And it's now confronted by an extreme right.
Yes.
What do you think is going to happen in France over the next...
The period is dangerous. It's dangerous for a lot of people, including Muslim people. We decided after the attacks to organize a big meeting, which name was For a Politics of Peace, Justice and Dignity. It was a big success. We gathered around 700 people, and we said we have to fight Islamophobia. It was a response to the attacks, our response. We have to fight Islamophobia. We have to fight state racism. We have to fight imperialism of the French, the French wars. We have to think about social justice. This is a question of dignity. And 2 months before, we organized a big demonstration led by women of color for dignity. It was a big demonstration. It was very good. And so after the attacks, we did this meeting. We were alone. I want to say that the radical left didn't want to sign, to join us. It was surprising for us. And it was a deception. But after that, they organized their own meetings. It was also a success. So after that, we said we have to come all together because there is a threat of the far right in France, and now we have to be all together to fight the state of emergency, the emergency state.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is this is positive. This is positive. I'm not saying it's extraordinary, but this is positive.
It's a step forward.
Yes, and we are going to do a very big demonstration in Paris at the end of January. This is the product of our fight.
But in terms of the fight against the extreme right, with Hollande, the French president, and Manuel Valls as prime minister, threatening to put a new law into the constitution, according to which, explain it to me exactly, because the coverage here has been bad, that if you are a dual national, that is, you have French and, say, Algerian. Or
just like me, for example.
You have French and Algerian. So you could, by a decision of somebody, be deprived of your French nationality. Exactly. And put on the plane back to Algeria.
Exactly. No.
No.
I won't go to Algeria.
Be deported.
I can stay in France, but with no rights. I'm not anymore a citizen. I'm nothing. I'm nothing.
So if they deprive you of your French nationality, that
I will stay in France.
But you can't vote?
But I have no status. No status. No official status. Nothing.
Okay. But what about people of Maghrebian origin who were actually born in France and they have no dual nationality?
No, they have dual nationality because people who were born in France have the nationality of their parents also.
Okay.
Okay? So we all have a dual nationality, actually.
Even if you don't have an Algerian passport?
Yes, but you are considered from Algeria. Algeria considers you as Algerian because you have Algerian parents.
What about the grandchildren who have not Algerian parents, but exclusively French parents of Algerian origin? We don't know.
We don't know.
Is this law being passed?
Not yet.
And what do you think?
I'm not sure it's going to pass.
Because there's a lot of hostility? There's
a lot of hostility in the Socialist Party and even in the right. I don't know why, but there is hostility.
Because it's a total attack on every principle.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I mean, it violates.
It's crazy and completely inutile, inutile, useless. Useless.
Yes.
It's useless because we can't imagine that the terrorists will be
bothered by
this, by being.
Houria, the attacks both on Charlie Hebdo and then later in Bataclan, were carried out by effectively French citizens of Maghrebian origin. What, in your opinion, what are the transmission belts that lead young French Arabs in this direction? Because if you read their biographies, prior to that they were smoking pot, they were running around town, they were drinking in bars, then they were arrested and locked up in prison. And in the case of some of them, that is where they turned to religion as a way out of all this. But from that, where is this transmission belt which they become part of and which leads them towards jihadism?
I think it's very easy to understand, actually. The first thing is that there is no political alternative.
For them?
For them. They don't think there is an alternative. There is no utopia. There is nothing to dream of. Nothing. They live in the suburbs. They don't have any future. There is unemployment. They are violently criticized in the media. So they feel humiliated by all this. Okay? So, but in the same times, all the movements in the suburbs led by immigrants or children of immigrants, just like us, are denounced. They are destroyed by the power. If it's not by the power, it is by the radical left. So, as there is nothing on the field, they are attracted by a political offer. Daesh is a political offer. And there is nothing else. The main problem is here. And as I told you, the radical left is not able to understand the problems of the suburbs, the question of identity, but dominated identities.
So in the next 5 or 6 years, there is no sign I see in France of change in a progressive direction, or the direction even which Emmanuel Todd in his new book outlines, a sort of big advancement of egalitarianism, equality, big attack on finance capital that doesn't look likely. So it's a fairly grim and dismal situation.
Yes, yes. And we have to create the alternative to the extreme right. This is a big issue, a big problem, a big challenge,
Just one more thing. Do the people you mix with, people in the suburbs who you mobilize, they're not interested in voting in French elections at all, are they?
Yes.
They don't vote, basically.
No, not really. They don't vote. They don't vote.
And yet their votes, if there was an organization which they respected, their votes could be quite decisive.
Yes. This, I think the biggest challenge in France is to make the demonstration that people of the suburbs can do politics and are able to exist politically and to make and to be part of the alternative.
But this alternative has to include, I would have said, people from many, many different spheres.
Yes, definitely.
Because it's very difficult. Women tried it, Black Americans tried it, to create a political organization, a party in the proper sense, simply on the basis of identity. It has to have a social political program.
Absolutely, yes.
Houria, I hope we will talk again and in better circumstances than France today, but thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.